cargo shipped through the Strait of Hormuz.
What's happening between the U.S. and Iran?
The blockade is back. The biggest single-day jump in oil prices in 6 years.
Confused messaging today on the opening of the Strait of Hormuz.
Iran. Right now, there are 230 fully loaded oil tankers sitting inside the Persian Gulf with nowhere to go. Not stuck because of a storm, not stuck because of a mechanical failure. They're stuck because the United States Navy just closed the door behind them, and the world's most important stretch of water is, once again, a war zone.
We're taking out all of their capability for anything having to do with the Strait, with the Hormuz Strait. And I think in the end, we will end up discontrolling the whole thing.
3 carriers, 27 warships, a 20% toll that got announced and then quietly walked back within 24 hours. This is the story of how America ended up trying to physically own a choke point that moves a fifth of the planet's oil, and why doing it might be harder than anyone in Washington is admitting. Before any of this, here's the number that explains everything. Roughly 13 million barrels of oil move through the Strait of Hormuz every single day. That's close to a fifth of everything the world burns, refines, and ships, funneled through a channel where the usable lanes are just a few kilometers wide. There is no real backup route. Saudi Arabia has pipelines that can reroute some of its oil around the strait. Oman can shift some cargo too. But Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, and the UAE don't have that option. For them, it's Hormuz, or it's nothing. So when this strait becomes contested, it's not a regional headline. It's a direct line into every gas pump, every shipping invoice, and every inflation report on Earth. Keep that number in your head. 13 million barrels a day, because everything that follows is really a fight over who controls it. This didn't start as a war about shipping lanes. It started with failed nuclear talks in Geneva and tension left over from a prior 12-day air conflict in 2025 that never fully resolved. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched what the Pentagon called Operation Epic Fury, a coordinated air and maritime campaign hitting Iranian command centers, IRGC headquarters, missile sites, air defenses, and naval assets in a single, overwhelming wave. Within days, CENTCOM's own commander claimed there wasn't a single Iranian warship left underway anywhere in the Gulf. But Iran didn't need its navy intact to hit back. It had something simpler and, in some ways, more effective: sea mines, drone boats, and the ability to make every insurer on the planet terrified to cover a tanker anywhere near Hormuz. Within days, war risk insurance premiums, which sat at a routine 0.125% of a ship's value before the war, spiked as high as 5%. For a single supertanker, that's the difference between a normal transit and a $5 million insurance bill just to sail through. The effect was immediate. Tanker traffic didn't just slow down, it nearly vanished. Container giants like Maersk, CMA, CGM, and Hapag-Lloyd pulled their ships out of the region entirely, rerouting around the Cape of Good Hope instead, a detour that adds close to 4,000 nautical miles and up to 2 weeks to a single voyage at a fleet-wide cost estimated near $50 million a week. And in the middle of it, Israel took out the man widely identified as the architect of Iran's blockade strategy. IRGC Navy Commander Alireza Tangsiri, killed in a strike on Bandar Abbas in late March.
The military commander is being killed from the very early hours of the initiation of the airstrikes by the Americans and Israelis.
By mid-April, with talks between Washington and Tehran collapsing, the U.S. stopped playing defense. On April 13th, Trump ordered a counter-blockade of Iran's own ports, not just protecting shipping, but actively cutting Iran off. Over the next 2 months, U.S. forces would redirect more than 140 vessels, disable 9 that refused to comply, and let through just over 50 humanitarian shipments. Briefly, it looked like it might actually work. On June 17th, Trump and Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian signed an agreement to end the war and lift the blockades. Oil prices, which had spiked over 60% at the worst of the crisis, started drifting back down. Ships started moving again, cautiously, but moving. It lasted 3 weeks. On July 8th, the truce collapsed. Iran allegedly struck multiple commercial vessels inside the strait, accusing the U.S. and Israel of violating the agreement first. By the weekend of July 12th and 13th, U.S. forces had bombed more than 80 targets inside Iran. Iran's Revolutionary Guard responded the only way it consistently has throughout this entire conflict, by closing the strait again.
Iran's military is now saying it will close the vital waterway again after the authorities in Iran said on Friday it would be completely reopened to commercial ships for the remainder of the ceasefire. Well, the Strait of Hormuz is a crucial route for global shipping, and there had been reports that around 20 ships, including oil tankers and container vessels, had started to sail.
On July 13th, Trump did something that even caught his own administration off guard. He announced on Truth Social that the U.S. was reimposing the naval blockade, and that it would now charge every single ship using the strait a 20% toll on its cargo, whether or not that ship had anything to do with Iran. He gave the operation a name, the Guardian of the Hormuz Strait. Markets didn't wait for clarification. Brent crude jumped over 9% in a single session, crossing $83 a barrel. WTI moved in lockstep, up to roughly $77. And this wasn't a slow burn reaction. Traffic through the strait had already collapsed to just 6 vessels crossing in a 12-hour window on July 11th, down from 18 to 22 a day before the fighting resumed. Then came the reversal. Less than 24 hours later, facing pushback from the International Maritime Organization, which flatly stated there's no legal basis for charging a toll just to transit international waters, Trump walked the fee back, saying Gulf states would cover the cost through trade and investment deals instead. The blockade stayed. The toll didn't. One detail puts this whole moment in perspective. According to CNN, the U.S. hasn't attempted a naval blockade at this scale since the Cuban Missile Crisis. There is, quite literally, no modern playbook for this. And by the Pentagon's own admission, officials were still finalizing logistics hours after Trump's announcement went out.
The U.S. will be imposing a 20% fee on all cargo shipped. It's not clear who will be paying that fee, whether it's the shippers or whether it's countries who are allowing ships to go through, and that the U.S. will help navigate this waterway for this fee.
So what does enforcing this actually take? 3 carrier strike groups, the USS Gerald R. Ford, USS Abraham Lincoln, and USS George H.W. Bush, carrying more than 200 aircraft between them, F-35s EA-18G Growlers for electronic warfare, F/A-18E Super Hornets, and E-2D Hawkeyes flying overhead as airborne radar stations. Around them, 10 guided missile destroyers, 2 marine amphibious assault ships, and a rotating fleet of minesweepers still working to clear mines Iran laid months ago. All told, this single deployment represents an estimated 41% of the entire U.S. Navy's actively deployed fleet, worldwide, concentrated in one stretch of ocean. But scale doesn't guarantee control. Iran has multiple ports along its coastline that could be used to slip cargo past the blockade. It has Chinese-made shore-based anti-ship missiles that make it dangerous for American ships to hug the coastline. And boarding a non-compliant vessel isn't a paperwork exercise. It risks armed IRGC personnel or civilian crews coerced into resisting at gunpoint. One former Marine described the gaps in a blockade like this as, in his words, nearly impossible to fully close.
To Iran never having a nuclear weapon, the Strait of Hormuz being open, as well as ending this conflict.
And the United States military has now reimposed its naval blockade of ships traveling to and from Iranian ports in the Strait of Hormuz.
Here's the part that rarely makes the headline. While American naval power was concentrating in the Gulf, China made its own quiet move 8,000 kilometers away, asserting control over the Scarborough Shoal in the South China Sea. Chinese leader Xi Jinping, in that same window, publicly called for Hormuz to stay open for the common interest of regional countries, while tightening his own grip on a choke point of his own. That's not irony. That's strategy. When one superpower's naval force gets tied down defending one choke point, it creates space for another to quietly reposition somewhere else entirely. Meanwhile, the rest of the world isn't just watching. The UK convened a 50-nation conference specifically about reopening Hormuz. Australia's Navy said it's ready to assist if called on. Canada condemned Iran's attacks outright. This has stopped being a two-country standoff. It's become a live test of who's willing to actually contest a blocked global choke point and who's content to let America foot the bill alone. So where does this actually go? Trump has already warned that if Iran doesn't return to negotiations, the U.S. will start striking bridges and power plants, a jump from military targets to civilian infrastructure that would mark a serious escalation. Energy analysts, meanwhile, are modeling scenarios where a prolonged closure could push Brent crude toward $150, even $200 a barrel, a level the International Energy Agency has called potentially the largest single supply disruption in the history of the oil market. And there's a structural problem nobody in Washington can wave away. This is the second time in 4 months that a ceasefire in this exact conflict has collapsed. If that pattern holds, the market isn't just pricing in the current blockade, it's pricing in the likelihood that whatever comes next probably breaks too. 230 tankers with nowhere to dock. 3 carriers holding a line the U.S. hasn't tried to hold since the Cuban Missile Crisis. And a toll that lasted less than a day. This is what a modern chokepoint war actually looks like. Not a single battle, but a grinding, expensive standoff over who controls the arteries the global economy can't live without. If you want to see how this plays out, because it's nowhere close to over, subscribe. The next move in the Strait of Hormuz could be the one that decides where oil prices and this conflict are headed next.